So I read this book, The Compound Effect, and it's all about achieving goals through small daily actions that we take. It's written by Darren Hardy, who became the publisher of Success Magazine and has interviewed hundreds of the most successful people. It doesn't give you a bunch of profound ideas, but rather actionable, realistic frameworks and models for becoming who you want to become. Chapter 1 begins by reinforcing that slow and steady wins the race. Darren says that the ultimate key to success is consistency, and that given enough time, one could beat virtually anyone by forming small routines and doing them consistently. The compound effect is about quick fixes and get-rich-quick schemes, stuff like that. It's about reaping the rewards from a lot of small, consistent actions. It's the kind of actions that never feel very significant during the day, nor do they give off any sort of immediate reward, and that's why most people don't bother to do them. Stop studying a language because they're still not fluent. They stop contributing to their IRA because the rewards aren't there yet, or they quit after the 8th day of running or working out because they still don't have the body they want. They're still overweight, things like that. They don't realize that these small steps completed consistently over time will create radical differences. And his great example is the magic penny, which is something you've probably heard of before. And he gives this example in the book where he says, imagine somebody asks you if you'd rather have $3 million in cash right now or a penny that doubles every day for 31 days. And logically, most people are going to go ahead and go with that. $3 million in cash, because that's very tangible, instant gratification, all those sort of things. And they'll be right for a while because it continues to stay at a very much lesser sum of money until the final 2 days where it shoots up to $11 million. And he explains that this effect, the compound effect, can be applied to any area of our life. Alright, chapter 2 is all about the choices we make. If you think about it, we come into this world with nothing, as nothing, and we craft ourselves and our reality based off the choices that we make. Everything in your life exists right now because at one point you made a choice and then you made another choice continually down the line until you are exactly where you're at right now, watching this video. And even by not choosing, you're choosing to be a passive recipient of whatever comes your way. So you still made a choice. So he says, you make your choices and your choices make you. And that every decision alters the trajectory of your life. It doesn't matter if it's the big stuff like your career choices, your partner, where you choose to live, or there's smaller things like drinking Coke instead of water, gossiping, drinking. All these things play a part in altering the trajectory of your life. So he writes in this chapter the importance of becoming aware of the choices we're making instead of just mindlessly making them. So many of our decisions are unconsciously shaped by outside influences from things like our friends and the videos we watched, all the way to our culture and just our upbringing. And as a consequence of this, it becomes so intertwined into our daily life and who we are that it's almost like we feel like we don't have much of another choice, or that's just the way it is. But that's not true. We do have a choice and you need to become conscious of these things. It's like no one intends to become fat or bankrupt or divorced, but people sabotage themselves by simply not becoming aware of all the small choices they're taking that lead them to that point. It's usually not the big mistakes that cause the setbacks and the shortcomings in life, but rather a combination of a lot of bad, small decisions. And the first decision to this, he says, is to start by taking 100% responsibility of everything in your life. And this means realizing that you're responsible for everything you did do, everything you didn't do, and how you responded to each of those things. And just that simple realization can be very empowering. You are in control. And it may seem like a pretty simple mindset, but if you do look around, you see a lot of finger pointing, blaming, victimhood, all those sorts of things. Or people expecting someone else to solve their problems, or the government, or whoever it may be. But he says that the power comes from when you realize that no matter who's president, how bad the economy is, or what someone did or didn't do, you're still 100% in control of yourself. Next, he says that one of the single greatest strategies he's used in his personal development is a scorecard, which is essentially just writing down your actions. Begin by picking any area of your life, whether you want a healthier body, a bigger bank account, better relationships, and then start tracking every choice and every decision you make that relates to that area of your life that you chose. That's every penny you spend, every workout you do, every meal you eat. By simply carrying a small notebook or having a notes page on your phone where you keep track of all these different actions, it makes you a lot more conscious of them, and it really keeps you accountable for what you're doing, which is pretty powerful because most of the time it's not that we don't know what to do, it's that we're just not doing it, or we are doing something we're not supposed to be doing. We have the knowledge, we're just not taking the action. So in conclusion, chapter 2, a powerful yet simple trick to making better decisions is simply keeping yourself accountable and becoming conscious of the decisions you're making. Chapter 3 starts by reinforcing that most of our lives are developed and lived through the habits that we have, yet most of us aren't really in as much control of those habits as we want to be. A lot of those unconscious habits come from things like modeling our parents or friends or colleagues, or even just society as a whole in the way that they do those things and then doing them ourselves. And obviously most of the habits we have aren't bad. They make life and just general living a lot simpler and smoother and less mentally taxing by just kind of giving us that base, but some of these habits that we have are bad. They are making our life worse. With enough repetition, any behavior starts to become automatic and turn into a habit. So whether you're doing something bad or good, it's going to become a habit. So because of this, we need to become conscious of the actions and habits they're creating. Because if we harness them properly, they can make up for things we lack in talent or intelligence or genetics or wherever else it may be. The first thing he goes into talking about is the instant gratification trap. The instant gratification trap has a hold on so many people, and it has such an effect on their lives. Instant gratification is simply giving into the urge to satisfy a craving in the moment instead of thinking about the long-term, bigger picture and the consequences that come along with all of that. So you're essentially falling into all these habits because you're not considering the future. You're just trying to satisfy yourself now. When you indulge on unhealthy food or scroll on your phone for hours, there's really no immediate impact on you. If every time you ate a bunch of greasy, unhealthy fast food, you had a heart attack, you would probably stop eating fast food. Obviously, those examples are pretty far-fetched and not realistic. They're pretty extreme, but it just goes to illustrate the point that it's all with a lack of consideration of the future that you're taking those actions. You probably aren't thinking of yourself 20 years in the future when you spend your afternoon scrolling on your phone all day. If you knew that you would look back with regret and not having achieved the goals you wanted to, you would probably spend your time differently. You would work harder, you would eat healthier, you would study more. But some people just don't, because all they're here to satisfy is that instant craving that they have. And then on top of that, it creates a whole other problem when it screws up your dopamine reward system to the point where you don't want to do things that don't provide you with that instant hit of dopamine. It just raises your tolerance so that it makes it harder for you to do things that aren't as instantly gratifying in the moment. It makes things like going to work or reading a book or working out a lot less rewarding and harder to do than just sitting on your phone and watching a 5-second TikTok video, because it doesn't give you as much gratification. Alright, second, you have to have a why. If you're relying on just your willpower to complete a goal, 99% of the time, you're probably going to fail, because your willpower and that initial bit of motivation is not going to be enough to keep you consistent. Challenges that you haven't foreseen will come. You're going to be tired, you're going to be frustrated, and day by day you'll become more lenient in your plan, and this will continue until you fail. People will tell themselves that it's their fault and that they just lack the willpower, but Darren says that this is not the right way to think about it. It's not a willpower issue, but rather a lack of a why. Why do you want what you want? And the answer to that question is what's going to keep you on track when things get rough. Because it's not a matter of if it gets rough. It's going to get rough. Things are going to happen. You're going to get fed up. You're going to be tired. All these different things are going to happen. And in those moments, you have to have a solid reason for doing what you're doing, or you will fail. That's why finding your why is so essential. Your why is the only thing that's going to be able to get you there in the long run. And a simple way of doing this, he says, is to connect your habits to the bigger goals and aspirations you have for your life. The wisest and most motivated choices are going to be the ones that align with that which you identify as your purpose, your core self, and your highest values. So yes, you have to want something, but you have to know why you want it, more importantly. Or you're eventually just going to give up and fail at it like you have every other thing you failed at. So instead of starting with how you're going to do something, start with that question of why you want to do something. What makes it important? And once you form this sort of formation, you can begin to figure out all the hows. But at that point, you start to realize that all these hows aren't as relevant as before, because if you want something bad enough, it's going to happen, and you're going to make it happen regardless of how. If you have a strong enough why, all the hows become possible. If you can recruit your heart, your soul, and your dreams into your endeavors, it will create a passion so that it won't really matter about all the hows, because either way, you're going to feel fulfilled because you're working towards whatever it is you really want. And then on top of that, you're more likely to be successful anyway. And it's also important to note that sure, you might be able to pull together the motivation and willpower to complete certain things, but it will in no way guarantee that you will feel happy, a sense of joy, and just meaning and fulfillment from that. And that's another reason of having that why. So that's why it says it's not enough to choose to be successful. You have to go deeper than your motivation and superficial desires and truly find your why that ties into your dreams and who you are. And he writes that the access to this why is the core values that we hold. And core values are something that we should all try to define for ourselves. And if you don't have yours, you need to figure them out, because they are essential in directing your life towards your greatest vision. But another reason it's important to have these defined is because when you don't have them defined, you can find yourself making decisions that don't align with who you want to be and those core values that you haven't yet defined. But another reason it's important to have these things defined is because when you don't have these sorts of things defined, you can find yourself making choices that conflict with who you truly want to be and who you are. If, for example, a big core value of yours is honesty, yet you hang around a bunch of people who lie all the time, there's going to be some conflict within you. You're going to get frustrated and feel disconnected even if you're not 100% sure why. So defining your values and principles and standing by them is essential in living a life that's true to yourself, and it plays a bigger role in your success than you may think. Alright, next he gives 5 strategies for eliminating bad habits. 1. Identify your trigger. 2. clean house. 3, swap it. 4, erase it. 5, jump in. The first one, as it says, is about identifying the triggers that lead to certain bad habits. It's the who, the what, the where, and when underlying all the bad decisions you make. Ask yourself, am I more likely to drink too much when I'm with certain people? What time of the day do I have to have something sweet? It's about figuring out what prompts your behaviors and then becoming aware of them. Second, cleaning house, one of my favorites, is very simple, yet can be effective in fighting against bad habits. It entails just cleaning things out of your life. So for example, if you don't eat junk food anymore, then simply stop buying junk food and clean your house of all the things that you don't want to eat. And that's a very simple, basic example, but the same applies to any area of your life. Make the bad habits inconvenient and you'll be much less likely to do them. So look at where you can make those bad things inconvenient and where you can remove yourself from those positions that prompt the bad behaviors. Third is swap it. So once you have a list of all the bad behaviors you want to stop doing, start looking at things or activities you can swap for something else. Something that can still play that role if it needs to be played, but just in a better, healthier way. So for example, say you always have to have something sweet after you eat, which is fairly common. That's something I definitely feel. Instead of going to the freezer and taking out a big thing of ice cream and eating 1,000 calories of ice cream, just simply swap it for something else, like say 2 Hershey Kisses or something like that. It can still fulfill your sweet tooth, but in a much better way. So examine the bad habits in your life right now and look at how you may be able to substitute something for something that may still play that same role, but just in a much better way. And then fourth and fifth, just simply know when it's better to ease in or out of a habit, or when you just need to go quit cold turkey or jump straight into it. Just understanding which kind of dynamic you need for certain things is important, and then doing it, obviously. He then follows these with 6 techniques for installing good habits. 1, set yourself up to succeed, which ties into the first thing about getting things out of your life. It's about making sure that these habits can fit into your current lifestyle. So this means not joining a gym that's 30 minutes away from your house, because that's not very practical. So make sure that the habits you want to implement can fit in your life pretty easily. 2, think addition, not subtraction. This is more of a mental tool, which is pretty much, instead of thinking about what you're going to be taking away, think about what you're going to be adding instead. So instead of thinking, I can eat chocolate today, think I can have some chicken or salad or something like that. Instead of, I can't scroll on my phone all afternoon, think, I can go exercise or read. It's a pretty simple mindset shift, but it can have really positive effect by just thinking about what you're going to be getting versus what you're going to be losing. 3, public display of accountability. And this is something you probably heard of before, but once you really decide you want to do something, tell people about it. It can be your friend, your family, whoever. But just by saying that you're going to be doing something ties your ego into what you're going to be doing and adds an additional level of accountability that can be quite influential. 4, find a success buddy. He says, there are few things as powerful as 2 people locked arm in arm marching towards the same goal. Finding like-minded people can help you so much. You can first and foremost keep each other accountable, but secondly, it gives you someone you can talk to about that goal and bounce ideas off of. Whether it may be struggles you're facing, feelings, ideas, just all these sort of things, it can help to have somebody like-minded that you can talk to about them, and that can additionally give you feedback on the work that you're doing. And it doesn't have to be somebody with the same goals as you necessarily. It can be, much broader than that. 5, competition and camaraderie. Setting up competition, whether friendly or not, can have great value and help you accomplish a lot more. Anyone who competes already knows this, but don't be afraid to look at areas of your life where you can really set up some competition with people. And lastly, number 6, he says celebrate. He says it's important to celebrate along the way as you go, because it can make it not so much as a constant grind. It doesn't mean you have to have a party or go out or anything crazy like that, although you can, but simply stopping around, looking and appreciating yourself and the work you've done can make a big difference. So be proud of yourself and celebrate it. Finally, he ends the chapter by reminding us that there's one thing in common with 99% of people, whether successful or not, and it's that they all hate doing the same dreadful things. The difference is that successful people do them anyway. It can be exciting though to realize that can be the one thing separating you from who you really want to be. It's pretty simple, and of course it's not always going to suck, but sometimes it will. And doing what's necessary in spite of the suck is what separates you, and that's when you can begin to become extraordinary. Chapter 4 is all about momentum and its importance. It's a common thing in the lives of successful people, from Lance Armstrong to Bill Gates, Richard Branson. And it's not something tangible you can feel or see, but you know when you have it because it always shows up for you. Momentum isn't something that's easy to have because you start with no momentum, and it takes a long time. It's a slow process to build that up. And it can be a bit of a grind sometimes, but if you can continue to push through it and build it, it will have a big payoff. The example he uses is a rocket ship that starts off with nothing except the full force of gravity against it, but through great effort it eventually gets off the ground and starts to build speed. and eventually it propels itself into orbit. The whole time it's exerting the same amount of force, but gradually it takes less and less, and it starts to go faster and faster as time goes on. And it's that same concept that applies to our lives and habits and all the things we do. In the same way that rocket ship has to use the most fuel initially to get off the ground before it can eventually slip into orbit, it's very hard to start everything we do. But once you get past all of this and create this great amount of momentum, you can become almost unstoppable while putting in less and less effort than the initial stages. Once things start going right for you, everything starts to flow, and it can affect every area of your life. If you had momentum, you know how important it is. But it's also important to remember that you can have negative momentum as well. Bad habits build bad momentum in the same way that good habits build good momentum. The way to start all of this stuff is to start by building systems for yourself. So many people fail at their goals because they don't have a clearly defined system for how they're going to execute their plan. They have a goal and they might have some sort of idea of how they're going to get there, but it's generally pretty vague and mainly relies a lot on just figuring it out. While sometimes that may work, it will probably lead to failure, and that's why it's important to create that sort of system. These can have broader outlooks and different things, but what I'm sort of talking about is the smaller, daily, actionable sort of systems, and in essence, it's pretty much just routines. Routine can be extremely effective and profitable if you simply ask yourself what you need to do every day to achieve your goal and then just do that thing. He says that the key to becoming world-class in your endeavors is to build your performance around world-class routines. However, it's pretty difficult and kind of impossible to predict always what's going to be happening during the middle of the days and things like that. So that's why it says the importance of a morning and evening routine. Because of the control that we have in these parts of the day, we can start to implement new behaviors and take out old ones and things of that nature. He goes into a bit of detail about his morning routine, but it essentially just involves a lot of appreciation and thought for the day, so planning as well. One important thing that he does that I like is he thinks about his top 3 priorities for the day, and he asks himself, what 3 things will most move me towards my goals and aspirations? And this is probably something you've heard of before, but it's because it's a pretty useful thing. And I really encourage it because we can have too many things floating around in our head, but by clearly defining that one thing even that we need to get done in the day and then making sure that thing gets done, we can look back on the day feeling like we've really done something and got ourselves closer to the goal. And then his nighttime routine is essentially just a lot of reflecting on the day. How did the day go compared to how I wanted it to go? What needs to be carried out in tomorrow's plans? What needs to be added or improved? What areas need work? Things like that. So just a lot of reflecting, journaling, writing down ideas from the day. And with all that said, don't be afraid to ever change up your routines if they're starting to get boring and you're not really getting the same things out of them that you used to be getting out of them. Alright, next, he's a big advocate of keeping track of things, and he has something he calls his rhyme register, which is just a chart with all the things you want to do throughout the week, how many times you want to do them throughout the week. And then as he goes by, marking down how many times you actually did them, to where you can see where you fell short and what areas you need improvement. And this can obviously be done in many different ways outside of his rhythm register that he has, but the main thing is just that you get it done. Whatever goal it is, whether it's workouts or relationship goals, it can be tracked, so make sure you do track it. Alright, next point on routines, make sure that there's something you'll be able to continually do over years or months depending on the goal, and they're not just something you create out of some burst of motivation that you're going to be done within a week. The goal is to create these things for life, so zoom out when you're thinking about all these things and turn it into something that can become that lifelong routine. Because creating a routine that you're going to follow for 2 weeks isn't really going to have any real effect on your life. Being consistent can be hard for anyone, but it's so important because anyone can fall short without levels of consistency. Even if they're good, passionate, ambitious people, when you aren't consistent with your actions, you aren't just losing what you would gain from the single workout or a meal or whatever the action may be. You're going to be losing that same momentum that we talked about earlier that you've created, and that is where you lose a lot more. The entire system and process will suffer, and you'll be set back a lot further than you think. Some imagery he uses for this example is a hand pump water well. These types of water wells require you to pump a handle that creates a suction, and eventually you bring water up the pipe and out of the spout. The problem is that most people start out all motivated and excited, and they grab the handle and begin to pump really hard. They're excited and committed, and they pump and pump, but after a few minutes or weeks in our case, they still aren't seeing that water, so they give up and all the water falls back down to where it started. They don't understand that it takes a lot more time to create that vacuum that eventually sucks the water up the pipe and out the spout. They put themselves back at square one because they didn't realize what was happening beyond what we could see. However, this persistent person will eventually get a steady flow of water that is a lot easier to pump. So remember that when you lack consistency and think that it doesn't really matter to just miss, one meal, one workout, whatever it may be. Things are going on that you don't realize, and missing a couple of days or weeks of anything can have, great effects on the whole plan that you aren't considering. So, again, missing workouts, cheating diets, forgetting affectionate gestures to your spouse, putting off business calls, all these things are costing you a lot more than just the time it took off. And it affects the whole system. It kills your momentum that you've built, which is the real loss. All right, chapter 5 is all about influences. Before we get started, I want you all to go check out in the description the channel I have linked. There's some important, really good messages in there that I also want to spread with everybody, so y'all go check those out. But anyway, like I said, chapter 5 is about the different influences on us and how most of us aren't even aware of them and the effect that they're really having on us. There's subtle effects that control our lives and trajectory, yet we often don't understand what they are and the roles they play. He gives us the 3 main sources of influence. That's inputs, association, and environment. Inputs are everything that our mind consumes. He says to think about the highest performing athletes in the world and how vigilant they are about consuming only the highest quality food and avoiding all junk food. He says we need to operate with that same level of vigilance for what we are feeding our brain. If we want it to perform at its peak, we have to be conscious about what we are feeding it and only give it good stuff. So think about, what are the things you're watching and listening to? What kind of media are you consuming? And it's not easy because you just look at something and you consume it. Our brains are constantly consuming everything that comes at it. It's not like food where you have to physically put it in yourself and make it that decision. So we don't always have total control over the inputs to our brain, but we can still add an extra level of vigilance to prevent our brains from absorbing irrelevant, counterproductive, and destructive information. Our brains aren't programmed to make us happy and productive people. They're programmed for survival, so they're a lot more sensitive to things like bad news and whatever is lacking in our lives, and aren't so concerned on the more positive and motivational stuff. That's when you watch the news, you're more than likely going to see some negative stuff that tells you everything wrong with the world. And all this can cause a lot of worry and negativity when we go throughout our day, especially if you consume this stuff in the morning when you're just getting your day started. But still, the same thing goes for the evening. And the news is just an example. It applies to all the counterproductive, mindless things that we're consuming. But the point is that we can overcome this by simply being conscious and protecting what we feed our mind. Negativity and bad news is everywhere, so it's not something that you're going to be totally able to avoid, but it's about controlling what you can, which is, in this case, a lot. He talks a lot about controlling the news we watch, which is why I gave that example a second ago, but it's really not as relevant as when he wrote it, because this is a bit of an older book, and I know especially us young kids, we don't watch any news or anything like that, or maybe it is relevant for you, so just take it as it comes. But anyway, if it does apply to you, think about the amount of news that you consume and ask yourself how much of it is really useful and relevant to your life, how much of it do you actually need in your life, and how much of it is just media trying to make things seem worse and just hook you in so you stay longer on their channel. And the same thing goes for all the different things that we consume on our phones. So just at least be conscious of the effects that these things have on you, whether they're conscious effects or subconscious. Our minds are sort of like empty glasses that will consume anything that comes this way. So be conscious of what you're consuming, because it's from these inputs that our lives are founded. Trade out the negativity and irrelevant media for the ones that can teach you something and inspire you. After you consume things, ask yourself how it made you feel. Do you feel motivated, inspired, interested, or more lazy, relaxed, anxious, stressed, worried? The second influence is our associations, and you've definitely heard this before, but it's because it plays such a big role in our lives and who we end up becoming. Our associations are some of the greatest influences that we have in our lives. These reference groups, he says, determine up to 95% of a person's success or failure in life. That's big. Think about that. So who are the people you habitually associate yourself with? Who are the people you admire and look up to? Look at the people you spend most of the time with and think about the influence they have on you. Because more often than not, these influences can be quite subtle, and you might not be able to directly point a finger at them, but they still play a role in shaping who you're becoming. You can't always hang out with negative people and expect to have a positive life. The same thing goes for positive influence as well. We start to adopt the habits and rituals of those whom we admire and hang around the most. We start to become more like them. So disassociate with people who don't make you better and who you don't have good experiences with. And it can be difficult to do, but it's essential to put a boundary between you and those who drag you down. If some of those people are people you can't necessarily get away from, like family for example, then just be conscious when you're around them not to let their ideas and behaviors seep into you. Then on the other side of this is reaching out to those people who you admire and who have the qualities that you want to embody. You can look for and join teams, groups, organizations, or just whatever environment is filled with the type of people who you want to be around. And then putting yourself in those environments of those like-minded people can have a good benefit on you. And I want you to realize the immense amount of information we have available to us at this point. Like, you can literally learn from any of the greatest people by simply researching them on the internet. No, they're probably not going to be your personal mentor, but all these people have a public presence in one way or another, and so you can probably read a book on them, or let's do a podcast where they've been interviewed, or any other medium so that you can get an insight into their brain and how it works, and gain some of their knowledge. It's free and easy to do these things, so that's why you definitely need to be doing it. And even beyond the knowledge of a singular person, you can find vast amounts of information on the internet in general, based off whatever topic you would want it to be. And I think the massive amounts of information is one of the greatest tools of our modern age. It's so much more readily available than it ever has been at any other point in history. So it's something that we really need to take advantage of. Pretty much whatever possible thing you're interested in or want to learn about, you can find it on the internet somewhere and become quite knowledgeable in it for free. We have more information available to us than ever before, and it's something we should all be taking advantage of. For example, if you know what career you kind of want to go into or have a few ideas in the back of your head, you can start researching about them, and you can kind of narrow it down, even do more in-depth research, or even contact people and start learning from them. There's just all these different ways to start paying down that ignorance debt that we all have. But anyway, associations play a major role in who we are, so keep that in mind with the relationships you hold. 3, environment. The environment we're in can have just as big an effect on our minds and who we become as the inputs and associations we have. Our environment can, for example, limit us in the same way that an oak tree would only be able to grow so large in a clay pot. So in that case, maybe you would need to start looking at other areas that are more encouraging and ambitious environments for you to live in. Dreams you have may be bigger than your environment. So sometimes the answer is just change the environment you're in. Think about the potential for growth that oak tree seed has in a plant versus the potential it would have planted in a forest. It's not only about our physical environment, though, he says. It's about everything that surrounds us, and that includes the environment of our psyche. Think about your own psychic clutter that hangs above you. Tasks uncompleted, things that aren't working around you, undealt with emotion. All these things can create very unideal environments for our mind. One really big way that we clutter our minds is through incomplete tasks. All the incomplete promises, commitments, agreements, whether you made them with yourself or with other people, are hindering your strength and stopping your momentum. And it's because these things keep calling you back and cause an underlying level of anxiousness and cloudiness in your brain that take you away from the present moment. So evaluate yourself and see where you could improve your mental environment. And lastly, with environment, understand that you get what you tolerate. And this is true in every area of life, but it's especially true in your relationships with family, friends, colleagues, whatever it may be. What you tolerate is reflected in the situations and circumstances you'll find yourself in. So in other words, Darren says, you will get in life what you accept and expect you are worthy of. If you tolerate disrespect, you're going to be disrespected. If you tolerate people being late, then you're going to be made to wait. If you tolerate your body being fat, tired, and slow, then that's exactly what you're going to be. Everything is a reflection of what you tolerate. So don't let things slide and just be okay. Everything in life will organize around the standards that you set for yourself. So set your principles and don't compromise. Alright, last chapter is about accelerating the whole process. He begins with a quote from Lance Armstrong. There's a point in every race when a rider encounters his real opponent and understands that it is himself. In my most painful moments on the bike, I am at my most curious, and I wonder each and every time how I will respond. Will I discover my innermost weakness, or will I seek out my innermost strength? Those moments Lance describes, Darren calls moments of truth. He goes into his own short story about the many small moments of truth. When he was a real estate back in the day, he would hit failure after failure throughout his long day at work and then go back to the office and do some cold calling where he would only fail more. But instead of quitting in those moments, he would recognize that his competitors were facing the same challenges and that if he kept going, he could gain ground on them, because chances are many of them were probably folding. And looking back on this book, that's one of my favorite ideas as a whole, is remembering that when it gets hard, it's hard for everyone, and that if you don't quit, others will be quitting, and that's where you can gain that ground. And it's worth noting that anybody can reach that wall for them, that point where it starts to get hard in whatever area of your life, whether it's your studies, routines, relationships, workouts, diets, whatever it may be. It's not that difficult to get to that point. It's not painful to go along with the herd, only ever keeping up and never gaining ground. Anyone can do that. What matters is what you do after you hit that wall, after the plan fails, after the pain takes over your body, after you've had a long day and don't want to work out. What do you do then? Those are the moments that define your true character. It's after you hit that wall that you can then start to distinguish yourself from the rest of your competitors. It's that extra effort after you've already done your best that is the difference maker. This can be such an encouraging realization, because once you realize that no one wants to be in those hard spots and face those great challenges, you will understand that if you can endure and solve them, you'll put yourself way ahead of everyone else. You're not going to distinguish yourself by doing what's comfortable and easy, So love it when it gets hard and when the conditions are unideal, because all that means that everyone else is suffering too, and you have the opportunity to distinguish yourself and accelerate your success. That right there, that whole little idea is one of my favorites of the whole book, and something that I've really stuck with me. So think about it. The next idea he introduces is pretty much the same thing. It's all about the greater power the compound effect has after you've reached some sort of max for yourself. A simple example is if you're weight training and you have 12 reps or your max or whatever, but you push another 3 or 4 reps by going deeper or shifting your body in a way to recruit other muscle groups, or whatever it may be that gets you that little bit more. The impact of those reps will be multiplied several times. You don't just gain the benefit of having done 3 more reps. The reps you do after you've hit a limit will greatly multiply your results. I use lifting as an example, but the concept, applies to all things we're trying to do. If you want to push harder, then take those habits you've built, and once you have hit your max, go a little further, because that little bit further is where so much improvement takes place. It expands your limits and gives you disproportionate results. Another way of doing this is going past what people expect of you, doing more than just enough. Because in a similar way, this extra effort you put in has a disproportionate effect on the person's expectations you beat. So whether it's putting in more work on a project at work, or just appreciating those people around you who don't often acknowledge as much as you should, it's important. That little bit more means so much more, even if it doesn't take you that much more effort. So ask yourself, where in your life can you put in that little bit of extra effort to beat and get multiplied results? Next, again, he talks about doing the unexpected. All of these things are pretty much the same concept, but it's still really important. He talks about how him personally, instead of sending Christmas cards like everyone else, he decided to send Thanksgiving cards where he handwrites what he's thankful for about them individually. And this is kind of odd, but he asked, how many Thanksgiving cards do you get? Probably none. So the impact that those cards have is so much greater simply because it's different and unexpected. Normal Christmas cards are always nice and everything, but they probably don't leave as much of an impression as his way. This is a bit of an interesting example. I'm not saying that everybody needs to start sending Christmas cards, but understand the concept can apply to anything. Just by doing things in an unexpected style creates a wow factor that just stands out enough and will multiply your impact and your efforts. And more often than not, the extra effort doesn't cost that much more money or energy, but by just going a little further and giving that little bit of extra thought or flair will multiply the impact. So just do the little extra bit if it's something that matters to you. Add something different, add a wow factor. He goes on to end that chapter with a quote that pretty much sums it up. He says, giving a little more time, energy, or thought to your efforts won't just improve your results, it will multiply them. It takes very little extra effort to be extraordinary in all areas of your life. Look for the multiplier opportunities where you can go a little further, push yourself a little harder, last a little longer, prepare a little better, and deliver a little bit more. Where can you do better and more than expected? When can you do the totally unexpected? Find as many opportunities for wow, and the level and speed of your accomplishments will astonish you and everyone else around you. Finally, in the conclusion, he reminds us that all the knowledge and different tips and tricks and strategies are all great, but if you don't take action on any of them, then none of it really matters to begin with. You can think and plan all you want, but you have to actually do something for there to be change. But the good news with that is that it doesn't really take much. The whole thesis of this book essentially is that it's these small, consistent steps over the long run that will generate these great results. It isn't calling you to do some great heroic actions, it's just calling you to do the small, simple things. Because it's through these small things that big results come. Whether those results are good or bad are determined by whoever's making them. So think about the goal you're trying to achieve, and then from there find your why. What makes it all worth it? Why is what's going to keep you consistent and dedicated. If you don't have one, the chances are you're going to fail when it starts to get rough and challenging and things stop going the right way. And lastly, just figure out all the daily actions you need to do that will get you there and incorporate them into your routines. And remember, it's never too late to start your journey. Just because you've failed before doesn't mean you shouldn't try again. And then always remember from that the sooner you start, the sooner you'll be able to get results, and the longer you'll have to make those compounding results even bigger. Alright, so that wraps up the book summary, but there are a few other ideas and things I want to talk about that didn't quite fit in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do those now. He talked about this in the book, but it's an idea that you will find in so many places, and it's not really unique to this book, but I just love it because it's had such an effect in my life. Such a positive shift can happen by looking for things to appreciate and things you've labeled as bad. You know, think of the areas you're struggling in right now, whether it's relationships, jobs, school, where you live, whatever. And just start making note of the good things that are present within them, because everything comes with something good. We too often get a bad mindset about things, and it turns them totally negative because we see the inconveniences and bad things in them. We let our day turn bad just because there's a singular bad thing that happened, and we disregard all the other things that went right that day. And it's the same thing in all the other areas of our life. We see the negative, and soon it's all we focus on, completely forgetting all the beautiful things that are going right around us. We should live each day with a deep appreciation to just be here, because when you went to bed last night, nobody promised you'd even wake up today. You know, you aren't promised anything. Everything around us belongs to God and the universe, and such an incredible shift can happen when you just begin to realize and appreciate what's simply being given the opportunity to experience everything around us. It's not ours to take for granted and treat as if they were ours and that we deserve them. That's a crazy, ridiculous mindset to feel entitled to all these things on earth that God has given us. But anyway, so look for the good things in life. Realize all the good going on around you and be thankful for that. Simple appreciation is one of the most powerful things that can make you happy. We live in such a beautiful world, and I just want everybody to appreciate it for what it is, and don't fall into the trap of taking life and everything around it for granted. So just remember to show appreciation. It's not always the easiest thing to do. Something we all struggle with. I know I struggle with it, but it never has a negative impact on you. Alright, second thing, it's okay to not have a very noble why. Why is very important. He talks about the importance of why, and I just want to note it doesn't have to be something like making the world a better place or anything like that. I'm sure that's an amazing why, and it's great to feel, but just feel whatever you really feel. You don't have to fake it and put on some sort of front. As long as it's moral and legal to some extent, then it's okay to be fueled by less, noble reasons, by like wanting to beat everybody into the ground or just prove them wrong. All that matters is that you have that fight and drive inside of you. You can talk all you want about being all inspired and motivated, but the truth is that there's a lot more anger and despair. All that matters is you have that fight and that drive and that desire inside of you. There's a anger. Anger can be a motivation to drive you to push yourself. It doesn't always have to be joy and motivation, because that's not always readily available for a lot of us. So just use what you have and make that your why. It doesn't have to always be some saving the world thing. Great if it is, but I know most of us don't have that kind of stuff. Alright, third thing, when implementing habits and making changes, it's often much smarter to not make such drastic changes at first. This is where a lot of people fail, because they make a decision that they're going to change, and then they just jump straight into some extreme activity that is exactly what they would be doing if they were, their perfect ideal self. And that can be great sometimes, don't get me wrong. And it can be great to jump into your perfect ideal self and start living that. But too often people get all motivated and they start out with some great new plan. And after a few days or a week or whatever, they stop doing it because it's really not that practical for the way that they've been living their life up to that point. For example, my buddy Drew wakes up for school at about 6:40 every morning, which is about enough time to put on some clothes and get himself to school. It's really quite a talent in itself. But anyway, he was talking to me about what I do in the morning and said he wanted to do something like that, and he wanted me to start waking him up at 5. And so he asked me to call him since he sleeps through his alarms. I don't know why my call was any different, but anyway. So I called him the next morning. He got up and everything. Then when we got to school, I asked him how his morning went, if he'd got his workout in and everything like that. And he told me he managed to do a few push-ups before he went back to bed and back to sleep. So, some people might be like Drew and not even make it to day one, which is kind of funny. In their new habits, I told him the solution is to start with a little less of a steep change. Obviously your body isn't going to respond well to taking off almost 2 hours of sleep for no reason. So maybe for him that would look like waking up 10 minutes earlier every week until you get to where you want, and at the same time be conscious and track your bedtime, before that, which goes back to the importance of tracking things to really make a change. But the point is that it's much more important to start out slowly sometimes and create change that isn't so dramatic and drastic, because sometimes it's so important to just get some momentum and start building from that to where you really truly want to be. One of the most important things in founding your habits is consistency. So it's great if you already have what it takes to make those drastic changes and stick by them. But chances are it's probably not going to be like that. So the best option might be to consider a slower, more consistent approach to those. Alright, so that's about it for the compound effect. And I just remember that none of it really matters if you don't take any action based off of, that. You can watch and learn and get motivated all you want, but none of it really matters if you don't take any action. So examine your life, consider the places you can make some improvements and just make them. You realize once you start, it's not really all that complicated and hard if you just start. So it doesn't take much, just small daily actions. Alright, I appreciate you all for watching. If you made it this far, I know that was a little rough at times. This was my first time using a whole script. I tried to write it out word for word to see how it went. And I don't think I'll do that again. But But either way, if you want a better look at it, the knowledge is there. I'm gonna drop some pictures of the script here, so you can just go through and read it if you want. It's pretty good stuff. And yeah, I just want to remind y'all again, check the links in the description to watch some of those videos. Those are pretty cool too. Make sure to subscribe and go out and take some action.